Hello, everyone. So, owing to some feedback I got, positive feedback from Maya, my favorite pagan, I decided to do another video where I'm reviewing a book, and made this one Rise of the Warrior Cop. And this is not going to be really scripted, it's going to just be me going sort of off the cuff here. So, Rise of the Warrior Cop by Radley Balko, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, really seeks to answer the question of how did we get to this? You know, on your left there is a picture of police as they were in the 70s, and the other picture, the one on the right, is from Ferguson. Now, I just have one simple question for you. Do those guys look like public servants? Yes or no? I mean, if I didn't know that was Ferguson, I would honestly think this was like some crisis in some underdeveloped country. So, how did we get here? The important points that Balko goes over, he talks about funding, the personality of Daryl Gates, Richard Nixon, and some truly horrible court decisions. The actual book starts off with an argument that cops aren't constitutional. Now, it quickly recognizes that, yes, there's a lot of things that aren't in the Constitution, and police are completely practical, but it's a good argument to sort of start off with when you look at our founding fathers. So as far as funding goes, he breaks down the 1033 program, which is essentially a program that filters military-grade hardware to local police departments. He also gets into grants and how they're distributed, and that they're kind of distributed counterintuitively. If you're a good police department and you bring crimes down, you get less grants. Now, these grants come from various sources. One of the hugest is going to be the Department of Homeland Security, often done in the name of fighting terrorism, although terrorism is a very rare crime. The book also touches on civil forfeiture, and what that is of course, if you commit a crime, let's say in your car, please get your car. If you commit a crime and you're arrested at your house, you got drugs at your house, they can seize the house. Civil forfeiture really gives a financial incentive for police to try to arrest somebody when they're actually in home. In other words, it creates a barricade situation. The book touches on Daryl Gates. Daryl Gates probably did more to change policing in America than anybody else ever did. He was the founder of SWAT, that's Special Weapons and Tactics. A lot of people who around now will know him as the head of the Los Angeles Police Department during the time of the Rodney King riots in Watts. There's also Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon started the war on drugs. Now, at the time that this was started, there were already studies in that it was better to treat drugs from the side of treatment. Find out why people are getting addicted and help them to do that. But once he recognized there was political clout in it, the militarization really began, and the book gets into the first drug raid, which was a disaster. The idiots actually went to the wrong place. He left office 47 years ago. Of course, fashion has changed significantly since then. Cars have changed significantly since then. Why are we still holding on to this antiquated war? The book also touches on a lot of horrible court decisions. Really, there isn't a presumption of innocence with no-knock raids. The very reason they're done is because the suspect could destroy evidence. Well, wait a minute. We're supposed to assume it's a free man in these domiciles. It also talks about how the founders would have never sanctioned no-knock raids. So let's get into the good about this book. So the good about this book is it is a history lesson. It starts off with how did police begin in America. Mainly there were sort of three kind of regions. There was policing as it was in, the North, policing in the South, and then Western policing. It holds politicians very accountable. Police do not draft and write legislation. They simply have to enforce a lot of things. And while it may be better to send supplies, like try to create incentives for our psychiatrists and caseworkers to work with the police, the 1033 program wasn't designed for that, and who's going to turn down free military hardware? It's just not going to happen. He also explains how fines work. So much of the county or cities get a lot of money from fines, and unfortunately, with poor areas that have lower sales tax, the pressure to fine people is a lot more. As my father said once, he said, sometimes I feel like I'm the Department of Collections, not Department of Corrections. And once you get arrested, it's all fees, court fees, fees for housing you, even be hit with a fee for investigating you. Another good aspect is he's not afraid to criticize people in the media. There are some high-profile incidences that BLM sort of hijacked, if you will, or certainly utilized, that he feels, he says, pretty much they're justifiable. So I was amazed to see him cross some lines on that. He's good at linking the financial with the moral. Oftentimes there's a financial reason for somebody to do something. There was a financial reason for the drug wars we've just discussed. There was a financial reason to reduce the blood alcohol content from, 0.10 to 0.08. And so oftentimes what we find out is that there's a financial incentive, but then oftentimes culture warriors go out and they create a moral incentive. Drunk driving used to not be as bad a crime as it was back in the day, and now it's almost right up there with sex offenses. Employers that have nothing to do with driving can ask you if you've ever had a DUI or anything like that. Now, I do think people who drink and drive should be punished, and make it as a fine as much as you want. But this stuff now where it's a black mark on your record and everything like that, I'm not down for that. He also goes through the disastrous results of when you believe in bad research, or more so in his case, what he talks about is a study that was cited that really wasn't a study. It was just a criminologist doing some surveys. It was in no way like peer-reviewed research or anything like that. He does an analysis of Columbine and the North Hollywood shootout. So, for those of you who may not know, Columbine was a school massacre. Harris and Klebold, I think, were the names of those guys. And North Hollywood shootout was a very long, protracted shootout that, well, relatively speaking, that was in North Hollywood, and it involved some guys who had made their own body armor, and they were also hopped up on some drugs. They didn't feel a lot of pain. They did not go down very easily, and they shot a bunch of cops up. Miraculously, no police died. The problem is that both of these are really bad cases for SWAT. In the case of Columbine, they got to the school, and rather than do sort of a dynamic entry that they're sort of known for, they set up a perimeter. And that gave a lot of valuable time to the two people inside doing the slaying. And again, with the North Hollywood shootout, it doesn't seem that they really contributed anything. He also talks about the personnel paradox. And what this is, and this is something I've noticed, there just, to me, seems that there's departments that are way too small to have SWAT. Because if you have SWAT, there should be only very few select people who can participate in that. I mean, when you really think about it, the book makes a good point that it's almost the guy who doesn't want to play with the flashbangs and things that you actually want in that case. And you want somebody who's very well trained. And so a lot of departments probably should not even have a SWAT. What's all the worse is that some of them have part-time SWAT. It's like, no, I do not want a guy who's just doing this like part-time. I want some trained professional, knows what he's doing with that equipment. It's first priority. Now we got to get into the bad. He glosses over policing styles. He doesn't get real in-depth on community-oriented policing, problem-oriented policing, or intelligence-led policing. He mentions them, but he doesn't really go in depth. And of course, unless you're maybe a nerd like me who took a lot of criminal justice classes to get their master's, probably doesn't really matter that much to you. He does mention how community-oriented policing is a term that's been hijacked. He doesn't seem to really criticize voters. Leaders are a reflection of people who vote them. And as long as people are going to vote for somebody who declares wars on things, then the problem's going to continue to happen. He doesn't use data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics either. Now, he mentions that most officers who die in the line of duty do, in fact, not die from bad guys or criminals at all. And honestly, most of them get hit by cars. And you can see why that is. But I think he should have used the Bureau of Labor Statistics, because you'll see that no matter how violent things are, police, I don't think, have ever cracked the top 10 deadliest professions. And I think some people are under the impression that there's a war on police and there's executions going wild. No, they are far safer than lumberjacks. They are far safer than commercial fishermen, people who work in demolition, high-rise steel workers, and I could go on. The book doesn't critique Lon Horiuchi, which he was one of the leaders of the paramilitary team that did Ruby Ridge. He fired the first shot, and because he handled Ruby Ridge so excellently, he was put in charge of the same sniper team at Waco. And guess who fired the first shot at Waco? Oh yeah, Lon. Dude, I think the only reason they didn't really critique him is, unlike Daryl Gates, who really advocated for SWAT and paramilitary tactics and basically brought it to every precinct in America, Lon Horiuchi did no such thing. He was just kind of a wild card. Now, John Walsh, we got to discuss him. America's Most Wanted, the ultimate victim advocate in America, I would say. John Walsh's son was abducted, murdered, and he came out of that a far stronger person, actually, and he did a lot of good things after that. I believe he's the reason why we have the sex offender registry. I think he was also behind Amber Alerts and whatnot. But he did do a lot of fear-stoking, and this book calls out a lot of the right-wing culture warrior, crime is rising, and, there's nothing but predators and prey. And I'm going to say that if you're going to do that, you do have to mention John Walsh. Now, don't get me wrong, John Walsh did a lot of great things with America's Most Wanted. He certainly saw justice for all. He was an advocate for the LGBT people. People involved in prostitution who were themselves victims of crime. People involved in narcotics culture, whether we're talking dealers or we're talking the deaths of addicts. So he really does deserve some props there. But he also is, the whole, it's 8 p.m., do you know where your children are thing? And he did a lot of specials in child abduction and all that. In short, he could make a wealthy couple be afraid to go into their own backyard. And, I remember growing up and coming home and, parents making you watch specials on what to do if somebody's going to abduct you or something like that. Now, one other criticism of John Walsh, just of my own personal thing, is he did nothing to bring attention to the fact that a lot of children, their suffering isn't stranger danger. Their suffering is actually coming from someone in the home, or at least someone in the family, And even abduction, a lot more abduction is actually parental than most people realize. So that's been my critique overall. I would say a good book. It's as fair to police and everything like that as it possibly could be, well educating you, and it's an easy read. Have a good one.